My name was Corporal Thaddeus Kane, 47th Cadian Shock Troops, and I need you to understand something before they execute me. I need someone to know what I saw, what I felt, what the hive mind did to me over those 73 days inside that creature. They pulled me out 6 hours ago. Magos biologist Corton and his servitor team cut open a Carnifex corpse in Specimen Bay. 7 Alpha, and there I was, suspended in a translucent sac, tubes penetrating every major vessel, my skin the color of spoiled milk. According to their instruments, I was still breathing, still conscious, still processing information for something that should not think. But let me tell you how I got here. Let me tell you what happens when the Tyranids don't kill you. My name was Thaddeus Kane. I was 28 standard years old when I deployed to Graven's world. I had black hair that I kept regulation short, a scar through my left eyebrow from a training accident when I was 19, and my father's gray eyes. My hands were calloused from 20 years of weapon drills, first as a white shield, then as a proper guardsman. I stood 1.8 meters tall, weighed 82 kilograms, and I could field strip a las rifle in 43 seconds even in the dark. These details matter. I need you to understand I was a person, specific, real, not just another casualty in the Imperial reports that would eventually read, Graven's World, total loss, population, 0, strategic value, consumed. I grew up in Kasser Voren, 3rd District, Hab Unit 7743. My father was Sergeant Major Leonid Kane, 8th Cadian Infantry. He died holding the line at Tyrock Fields when I was 11. I remember his hands, huge, scarred hands that could disassemble a heavy bolter but were always gentle when he adjusted my las rifle grip. "Steady, Thaddeus," he'd say. "The weapon is an extension of your will. Respect it, and it will serve you. Fear it, and it will fail you." I kept his dog tags. They were in my left breast pocket when the Carnifex's claws punched through my flak armor. My dream was simple: survive long enough to earn sergeant's stripes. Maybe find a nice posting on a civilized world for my last decade of service. Nothing grand. The Imperium didn't promise us grand things. They promised us death in service to a corpse emperor whose protection was the lie they told to make us march into hellfire without question. The Emperor protects, the commissars would say before every drop. But I'd seen enough men die screaming to know better. We protected each other. The Emperor was just the name they used to make us feel like dying mattered. Still, I was good at my job. I kept my squad mates alive when I could. I followed orders. I didn't think too hard about the propaganda. Thinking got you noticed by the commissars, and being noticed got you shot. Then the Tyranids came to Graven's World, and thinking stopped mattering at all. Day 1, Hour 0. That's when the bioships entered orbit. We'd had 3 hours warning from the system's automated defense satellites before they went silent. 3 hours to dig trenches, establish firing lines, and listen to the priests chant their useless litanies about the Emperor's protection. "The Emperor protects," they said, voices echoing across the assembly grounds. "The Emperor protects," we repeated, because you repeated when ordered. He didn't protect us. By hour 6, the first spores were falling like rain, each pod the size of a chimera transport, each one birthing horrors that moved wrong, sounded wrong, smelled wrong. That smell. I need you to understand that smell. It wasn't death. I knew death, had slept in trenches full of corpses on 3 prior deployments. Death smells like copper and rot and human waste. This was different. This was biological purpose. It smelled like acidic flowers and raw meat and something sweet underneath, like the fermentation vats in a nutrient processing plant. It made my hindbrain scream because some primitive part of me recognized it. This was the smell of being prey. We held the line for 11 days. Not because we were winning, but because the Hive Fleet was learning, probing, testing our responses. Every wave was different. First came the small ones, termagants and hormagaunts that tested our firing patterns. Then the carnifexes and warriors that broke our heavy weapon positions. Then things that didn't match any of the picked files in our data slates. Specialized organisms designed specifically to counter Cadian defensive doctrine. They were adapting to us in real time. Every tactic we used, they countered within hours. Last fire. They sent organisms with reflective carapaces. Flamers. Creatures with heat-dissipating frills. We weren't fighting an army. We were feeding data to something that learned from our every move. By day 11, my platoon was down to 14 men from an original 60. We'd retreated to Firebase Hadron, a rockcrete bunker complex that Command assured us was strategically vital and defensible. More lies. There was nothing strategic about Graven's world except the billion human bodies the Hive Fleet wanted to consume. That's when I saw my first capture. Private Denon, 19 years old, barely finished his first deployment, took a hit from a warrior's boneswood. The blade didn't kill him, just punched through his leg and injected something. He went down screaming, not in pain but in paralysis. His eyes were wide, tracking, aware, but his body had stopped responding. We tried to pull him back. Sergeant Vaughn grabbed his webbing, started dragging him toward the bunker entrance. Then the smaller organisms came. These weren't the killing swarm, these were different. Bipedal, almost human-sized, with manipulator claws instead of talons. They surrounded Denon in seconds, and when Vaughn tried to fight them off, they just ignored him, pushed past him like he was irrelevant. They took Denon, carried him into the seething biomass of their lines while he screamed. Not words, just raw terror. And we couldn't do anything because they had stopped attacking. The swarm pulled back 200 meters and just waited while their collector organisms disappeared with our squad mate. "The Emperor protects the faithful," Commissar Holt said, his voice flat. Private Denon failed in faith. "Continue your duties." That night I heard Denon's voice on the Vox. Except it wasn't words, it was screaming that formed patterns, durations and intervals that our technical specialists said matched Imperial tactical codes. The hive mind was using Denon's vocal cords to broadcast at us, seeing if we'd recognize it as a distress signal and respond. We didn't. Vaughn put a last round through the Vox unit instead. I should have realized then what they were doing. Should have understood that the Tyranids didn't just consume biomass. They consumed information. Every organism they captured was a database they could extract. Every human they took alive was a manual on how to kill humans more efficiently. But I was stupid. I was loyal. I believed that holding the line mattered, that my training and discipline would be enough. On day 12, hour 3, I learned exactly how wrong I was. The attack came at 0317 hours, late enough that fatigue had set in, early enough that dawn's light wasn't helping us see. They hit from 3 directions simultaneously, a Carnifex spearhead from the north, a Genestealer infiltration through our southeast tunnel network, and a rain of gargoyles from above that carried acid spitters. Standard doctrine. Form defensive squares. Concentrate fire. Hold until reinforcement or death. We drilled this 1,000 times, so we formed up. I was on the north line, las rifle braced against the bunker's firing slit, targeting locks illuminating the massive shape of the lead carnifex as it charged through our kill zone. My first 3 shots hit center mass, useless, just scoring the armor. I adjusted, aimed for the eye clusters like training demanded. That's when I noticed the carnifex was wounded. Badly. Its left side was torn open from previous fighting, ichor streaming from a gash that exposed internal organs that pulsed wrong. Too many chambers, wrong colors, geometries that didn't match Terran biology. It was dying. "Target the wounded one," Sergeant Vaughn shouted. "Bring it down." We poured fire into it. Las bolts, autocannon rounds, a crack missile from Corporal Thex's launcher. The carnifex stumbled, crashed forward, and in that moment I felt something close to hope. If we could kill something that big, maybe we could. It vomited. Not the acid spray we'd been warned about. This was different, a projectile mass of translucent gel that erupted from its secondary mouth and flew toward our position with impossible accuracy. I had half a second to see it coming, another half second to realize it was aimed specifically at me, and then it hit. The impact felt like being punched by a sentinel's power fist. I flew backward, slammed into the rockcrete wall hard enough that I tasted blood, and when I tried to stand, the gel was moving. It had wrapped around my legs, my waist, and it was contracting, pulling tight, and oh God, it was warm. It was body temperature, and it was pulling me toward the bunker entrance. "Kane's hit," someone shouted. "Grab him." Hands on my arms, Vaughn and Thex, trying to haul me back. But the gel was strong, impossibly strong, and it was secreting something because my flak armor was smoking, dissolving where it touched, but my skin underneath was just numb, tingling, not burning. Some chemical that affected synthetic materials, but not organic tissue. They designed this specifically to remove armor without killing the target. "Cut him loose." Vaughn had his combat knife out, slashing at the gel. The blade passed through like it was water. No resistance, no cutting. Fuck, it's not. The carnifex was moving again. Despite its wounds, despite the fact that we'd pumped enough firepower into it to drop a Lehman Russ, it was dragging itself forward, and the gel was pulling me toward it, and I realized with perfect crystalline horror. This wasn't an attack. This was collection. "Shoot me," I screamed. "Vaughn, put a round in me. Don't let them." Commissar Holt appeared in my peripheral vision, bolt pistol drawn, and for one blessed moment I thought he'd do it. Thought he'd give me the Emperor's mercy. No, not the Emperor's. There was no mercy in that corpse. Just the simple human mercy of death before capture. But he didn't shoot me. He shot Vaughn. The bolt round took Vaughn in the chest, explosive payload detonating inside his rib cage. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings, and Holt's voice was perfectly calm. "Let the compromised soldier go. We cannot risk infection spread. The Emperor protects the uncompromised." Thex let go of my arms, not because he wanted to. I saw his face, saw the grief and rage and guilt, but Holt had the bolt pistol, and Holt had authority, and refusing a commissar was death. The gel pulled me through the bunker entrance. I clawed at the door frame, fingernails breaking against rockcrete, and the last thing I saw of Firebase Hadron was Thex's face. tears cutting channels through the grime and blood, his mouth forming words I couldn't hear over my own screaming. Then I was outside in the swarm, and the Carnifex was above me, and its manipulator claws were surprisingly gentle as they lifted me toward its damaged thorax. Toward the wound that I could now see wasn't a wound at all, but a cavity, an internal chamber lined with feathery membranes that were already secreting more of that translucent gel. My last conscious thought as a free human was absurdly bureaucratic. The Emperor protects. That's what they told us. That's what they all say. They lied. Then the membranes closed around me like a fist, and the dissolution began. Inside the Carnifex's cavity, there was no light, but there was sensation. Oh God, the sensation. The gel that had captured me was thickening, becoming viscous, pressing against every centimeter of my body with even pressure. Not crushing, precisely calibrated to immobilize without suffocating. I could breathe. The gel formed channels to my nose and mouth that carried air from somewhere, recycled and warm and tasting of that sweet-rot biological smell. I tried to scream. The gel dampened it, absorbed the vibrations. My voice became muffled, distant, useless. Then the tubes came. I felt them before I saw them, which was impossible because I couldn't see anything, but I felt them sliding across my skin like worms, leaving trails of tingling numbness. They were probing, searching, and when they found what they wanted, they pushed inside. The first one entered through my right thigh, punched through the uniform fabric that was already dissolving, through skin that the gel had somehow softened, and into the femoral artery. I felt it threading up through my circulatory system, a wrongness traveling through my veins that my body couldn't process as pain because it was too alien, too precise. More tubes. Left arm, into the brachial artery. Right side of my neck. Carotid. Lower abdomen. I didn't know the name of what it was entering, just that something was inside me and moving deeper, branching, spreading through my internal network like roots through soil. The pain started when my blood began to change. I don't mean I was bleeding. I mean my actual blood was being modified. I could feel it. A warmth spreading from each tube insertion point, traveling through my arteries, and when it reached my heart, the organ stuttered, skipped 3 beats, then resumed with a rhythm that was slightly wrong. Faster, more efficient. Not my rhythm anymore. My training tried to assert itself. Control your breathing. Manage the pain response. You've been taught to endure. The Emperor? No. No, there's no Emperor here. Just you and the pain. Focus. But this wasn't pain I could manage. This was dissolution. The gel around my skin began to warm, then to tingle, then to burn, except burning isn't the right word because burning destroys. And this was something else. This was conversion. The outer layers of my skin were liquefying. I could feel them sloughing away, except they weren't sloughing. They were being digested in place, broken down into constituent molecules while my nervous system remained intact to report every microsecond of the process. I screamed into the gel, screamed until my throat was raw. It didn't matter. No one could hear me. I was inside a living tank, being dissolved alive. And the Carnifex was still moving. I could feel it walking, each footfall a rhythmic vibration through the cavity walls, like being inside a drum. My skin was gone. All of it. The outer dermis had been processed away, leaving raw exposed tissue that should have been agony but wasn't because the tubes in my bloodstream were releasing chemicals. Analgesics, I realized. Synthetic compounds designed to keep pain at a specific level. Not absent, never absent, but managed. Enough pain to keep my nervous system firing, reporting data, but not enough to shock me into unconsciousness or death. They wanted me aware. They wanted me conscious for this. I could feel the gel interfacing directly with my exposed tissue now. Could feel it reading me at a cellular level. Sampling. Testing. Learning the exact composition of human muscle. Human fat, human connective tissue. And through it all, I could feel something else. A presence that wasn't thought, but was definitely intelligence. The hive mind was in here with me. Not speaking, not communicating in any way I could describe, but attending, focused on me like a researcher focuses on a specimen slide. I wasn't a person to it. I was data. I was a manual written in flesh and nerve and bone, and it was reading me with absolute attention. The muscle dissolution began during what my compromised chronometer told me was local night cycle. Not that day or night meant anything in this lightless womb, but my body still tracked circadian rhythms for now. This was different from the skin. The skin had been surface, relatively simple. Muscle was structure. The gel had to work carefully, breaking down tissue fibers in sequence, layer by layer, while the tubes in my blood maintained pressure and nutrition to my remaining organs. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. My right bicep being dissolved, fiber by fiber. The sensation like thousands of tiny hooks pulling me apart from within. I tried to move my arm. It didn't respond. The muscle was no longer structurally sound enough to produce motion. I was becoming a thinking sack of organs suspended in gel, and I was so hungry. The tubes were feeding me. I knew that intellectually they had to be, or I would have died from malnutrition hours ago, but my brain still screamed for food, for water, for the basic necessities that defined me as human. The tubes didn't care about my brain screaming. They delivered precisely calculated nutrients directly to my digestive system, proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, vitamins. Everything I needed to survive. Nothing I wanted. I tried to think about something else. Tried to retreat into memory. My father's face. Leonid Kane, Sergeant Major, hero of Tyrock Fields. Could I remember his face? Yes. Gray eyes like mine. Scar on his chin from a Chaos cultist's knife. His hands. His hands were gone from my memory. I could remember they existed. Could remember the concept of them adjusting my rifle grip. But the specific image was corrupted, dissolving like my muscle tissue, because the chemicals in my blood were affecting not just my body, but my brain, preparing it, softening the neural tissue for later access. They were going to read my mind. I understood that now. This wasn't just biomass collection. This was data extraction. They were dissolving me in sequence. Skin, muscle, organs, leaving my nervous system for last so they could access every memory, every tactical doctrine, every secret I'd ever learned about how the Imperial Guard fought. I was going to betray humanity just by continuing to exist. Most of my muscle mass was gone. I could feel my skeleton now. Actually feel my bones as distinct structures because there was nothing between them and the gel except liquefied tissue, and the tubes that kept me alive. My rib cage expanded and contracted with each breath, and I could sense each rib individually, could feel my heart beating against my sternum with nothing but a thin membrane between them. I was becoming an anatomy diagram. A living cross-section, all the hidden structures of human biology exposed and catalogued, and I could no longer close my eyes. My eyelids were gone, dissolved in the first hours, so even though there was no light in the cavity, my eyes were forced permanently open, staring into absolute darkness while the gel brushed against my exposed corneas with each pulse of the Carnifex's circulation. It should have been painful. The tubes prevented that. Instead, it was just wrong. The constant awareness of vulnerability, of delicate organs unprotected, of being opened like a book for reading. The hive mind's attention intensified. I felt it like pressure behind my eyes, like someone leaning close to examine fine print. It was in my nervous system now, I realized. The chemicals in my blood had made my neurons permeable to whatever signals the Tyranids used for coordination, and I was becoming part of the network, not controlling it. God, no. I was a read-only terminal, an input device. My thoughts were being copied in real time and transmitted to something vast. I tried to think in high Gothic prayer cant, the complicated theological passages the priests had made us memorize. If I had to think, at least I could think in encrypted formats that might confuse the... No, that was stupid. The hive mind didn't care about languages or encryption. It was reading electrical patterns, chemical signatures, the base code of consciousness itself. Prayer cant or battlefield coordinates or my father's name, it was all the same data to something that thought in biological algorithms. There was no resistance I could offer. No way to protect what I knew. I was betraying every human who'd ever trusted me just by remaining conscious. I should die. I needed to die. But the tubes wouldn't let me. They began the brain interface during what I still thought of as morning. Though my circadian rhythm was degrading, I could feel it coming. A pressure building at the base of my skull, and then something pushed through the vertebrae at my C1, threaded up into my brain stem, and connected. The sensation was indescribable. Imagine every thought you've ever had suddenly having an audience. Imagine your internal monologue becoming dialogue, except the other party doesn't speak. They just know, they observe, they record. My memory of basic training on Cadia. Accessed. The hive mind flipped through it like pages in a manual. Weapons specifications, squad tactics, officers' command styles, weak points in standard Cadian defensive formations. I could feel each memory being activated, read, catalogued, and I couldn't stop it. My consciousness was being burgled, and I was aware of every stolen moment. The interface went deeper. Now it wasn't just accessing memories, it was testing responses. The gel would shift, create pressure simulations, and my nervous system would react. The hive mind was learning my pain thresholds, my fear responses, the exact chemical cascade that occurred in my brain when I experienced terror. It would trigger the fear, record the result, then trigger it again with slight variations. Scientific method applied to consciousness. I was a laboratory, and the experiment was, how does this human break? Between tests, my mind wandered in strange directions. I thought about Private Denon, the kid they'd taken before me. Was he still alive somewhere inside another organism? Were we neighbors, separated by meters of alien flesh, both being dissolved for information? The hive fleet was a distributed database. Every captured human was a repository node. We were a library they were building, indexed by pain. I lost my hands today, not metaphorically, literally. The gel had dissolved enough structure that my hands were no longer mechanically sound. They hung from my wrists like bags of disconnected bones and tendon, and when the Carnifex moved suddenly, combat, I realized. It was fighting something. My left hand detached completely, dissolved into slurry that the cavity absorbed. I felt it happen, felt the moment my hand stopped being my hand and became biomass. Felt the tubes extracting the last useful data from the disintegrating nerve endings. Then nothing. The absence where sensation used to be. I was shrinking, losing pieces. Soon there would be nothing left but a brain and a spinal column suspended in gel. Still thinking, still aware, still betraying everything I'd ever known. The hive mind asked me a question, not in words. It couldn't use words, but it created a simulation in my neural interface. An abstract scenario involving Cadian defensive positions and Tyranid assault patterns, and I felt my tactical training activate automatically, analyzing the scenario, proposing solutions. And I answered it. I couldn't help myself. The question was there in my brain, and my training was to answer tactical questions. And before I could stop myself, I'd thought through 3 different defensive solutions, including optimal fields of fire and fallback positions. The hive mind recorded everything. I felt it absorbing the data, felt my tactical knowledge being indexed and cross-referenced with what it had learned from other captured humans. It was building a composite model of Imperial Guard doctrine, and I had just contributed to it. I was complicit. I had collaborated with the enemy that was dissolving me alive. I tried to scream. No vocal cords left. They'd been dissolved on day 5. Instead, my brain just screamed internally, and the hive mind noted the distress response and filed it under psychological stress markers for future reference. My sense of time was collapsing. The tubes had dissolved my pineal gland, the structure that regulates circadian rhythm, and now I couldn't tell if seconds were passing or hours. My consciousness would surface, process some new horror, then sink into something that wasn't sleep but wasn't waking either. A suspended state, preserved awareness without true consciousness. In one of my wear periods, I felt the Carnifex die. It wasn't sudden. The creature had been degrading for days. I'd felt its systems failing, felt it becoming less coordinated. The hive mind had been using it as a mobile processing unit, keeping it functional just long enough to extract maximum data from me and whatever other specimens it carried. When my data extraction was complete, the Carnifex was no longer strategically valuable. So it died. The cavity walls stopped pulsing. The temperature dropped 3 degrees. The ambient sounds of biological function, the gurgle of ichor circulation, the creak of carapace plates, all ceased. I was inside a corpse, still alive, suspended in gel in a tomb of chitin. I tried to feel relief, tried to think that maybe this was over, that I'd die here peacefully in the darkness, but the tubes were still functioning, still feeding me, still maintaining my consciousness. Because I wasn't inside the Carnifex anymore, not really. I was inside the hive fleet. The Carnifex was just a container, and containers were interchangeable. They would recover this corpse. Open it, extract me, and the dissolution would continue. The retrieval organisms came for the Carnifex corpse in what I estimated was early morning, based on thermal patterns I could somehow sense through the cavity walls. Not see. My eyes were gone now, dissolved on day 11. But the neural interface gave me access to some of the creature's residual sensory data. and I could feel them cutting through the carapace. Light poured in. Actual light. I couldn't see it, but I felt its heat, and my brain interpreted the sensation as blinding brightness, even though I had no eyes to blind. Claws peeled back the cavity walls. I felt the gel drain away, felt my suspended consciousness suddenly subject to gravity for the first time in 2 weeks, and I would have screamed if I'd had any structure left to scream with. Something lifted me. Manipulator organisms. The same kind that had taken Private Denon. I was just a brain now, a spinal column, and some major organs suspended in a mess of dissolving connective tissue. They were careful not to damage me. Precise. I was still valuable data. They carried me through the swarm. Through the neural interface, I could sense the scale of it. Millions of organisms, all coordinated, all purposeful. The hive fleet had grown since I'd been captured. Graven's world was nearly consumed. Billions of humans processed into biomass. Thousands captured for data extraction like me. I tried to find them, the other prisoners. Tried to reach out through the neural interface. See if I could contact another human consciousness in this nightmare. I found 17 other humans still alive inside the swarm. Some had been here longer than me. Weeks, months. Their thoughts were fragmented, barely coherent. They'd lost too much brain tissue to higher order cognition. Just base awareness remained. Pain, fear, the screaming animal core of consciousness that wouldn't die even when everything else was gone. One of them noticed me. A presence I could only identify as guardsman, female, age, corrupted data. I knew immediately I shouldn't identify gender, that was wrong, against parameters, but the hive mind's data was absolute, and I was reading it directly now. Delete that. Reframe. A presence I identified as guardsman designation, corrupted. No gender. The parameters must be followed. The rules were clear. But I had already processed the information, had already felt the presence of someone who had once been fully human, and the knowledge that the Tyranids captured all genders for processing made the horror worse because it meant the scale was larger than I'd feared. Focus. Maintain the parameters. The gender is irrelevant to the horror. The horror is the dissolution. The horror is the eternal awareness. The presence reached toward me through the network. Not words, just a feeling. Help, please, mercy, kill. I couldn't help. I couldn't do anything. I was being carried to my next processing stage, and they were trapped somewhere in this biomass hell, and we were both betraying humanity just by remaining alive. The manipulator organisms delivered me to a new chamber, not inside a creature this time, but inside something larger, a biostructure, a fixed installation. Through residual sensory data, I understood. I was inside a digestion pool, a vat of enzymes where they would complete the dissolution, breaking down everything except my brain and primary nervous system. They were going to preserve me, keep me alive and aware as a permanent data repository, a living library node that could be queried indefinitely. The enzymes burned. They burned, not metaphorically. Actual burning as the chemical bath began to process my remaining tissue. And the tubes kept functioning, kept feeding nutrients to my brain, kept maintaining consciousness while the rest of me was dissolved away. I was in hell. There was no other word for it. This was eternal torment, and I deserved it because I had answered their questions, had given them tactical data, had collaborated. The Emperor protects, the priests used to say. The Emperor protects the faithful. But there was no emperor here. No protection, no divine intervention, just acid and consciousness and eternity. I understood now what Graven's world had really been. Not a battle, but a harvest. Not warfare, but industrial processing. The Imperium called us soldiers, gave us ranks and doctrines, and told us we mattered. We didn't matter. We were crops. And the Hive fleet was very, very patient about extracting every possible calorie of value. Time stopped meaning anything around day 16. The neural interface gave me access to the hive mind's chronometer, but those measurements were based on biological cycles that didn't match human perception. Sometimes what felt like hours was actually minutes. Sometimes minutes stretched into subjective days. I was no longer inside a body. I was a brain, a spinal column, a cluster of primary nerve ganglia, all suspended in enzyme solution that was kept at precisely 37.2 degrees Celsius, human body temperature, maintained indefinitely. The tubes fed me, oxygenated me, kept me alive, and the hive mind used me. Every few cycles, I couldn't measure them anymore. It would send queries through the neural interface, tactical scenarios, questions about imperial doctrine, requests for clarification on human psychological responses. I tried to resist, tried to fill my thoughts with nonsense data, corrupt the information, but I couldn't control my own mind anymore. The interface had grown deeper, more integrated. When the hive mind asked a question, my brain answered before conscious thought could intervene. My training, my knowledge, my entire military education was now their resource. I had become a tool of the enemy, not metaphorically, literally. I was a biological processor in the Tyranid network. I felt the hive fleet move to a new system, felt it through the network, the great biological ships translating through void, carrying trillions of organisms and 17 human prisoners toward fresh hunting grounds. We could sense each other now, the other 16 prisoners and I. The hive mind didn't prevent our connection. It was irrelevant to its purposes. Sometimes we would reach out to each other through the network, sharing fragmented thoughts. None of us could communicate coherently anymore. Too much brain damage, too many neural pathways dissolved. But we could share sensations. The feeling of being trapped, the endless burning of the enzyme bath, the horror of continued consciousness. One of the prisoners had been in the digestion pool for 4 months. 4 months of dissolution that never completed, just cycled endlessly, breaking down tissue, extracting data, then using the biomass to regenerate just enough structure to continue the extraction. They were caught in a loop. Dissolve, regenerate, dissolve, regenerate. Forever. That's what they were going to do to me. I understood that now. This wasn't temporary. This was my eternal state. I would be carried from system to system, queried about imperial tactics, kept alive in enzyme solution until the hive fleet had consumed every world, and there was nothing left but the Tyranids and their screaming libraries of human consciousness. I learned the true scale today. The hive mind allowed it, whether intentionally or because my integration was now deep enough to access broader network data. I couldn't tell. But I saw it, the full scope of the hive fleet. Thousands of bioships, trillions of organisms, and in the digestion pools, preserved in enzyme baths across the fleet, 847 human prisoners. Some had been alive for years. The oldest had been captured during the initial Tyranid invasion of the Eastern Fringe, 7 years ago. 7 years of dissolution. 7 years of answering questions. 7 years of awareness. The consciousness was still present in that prisoner. Barely. Just a spark of identity screaming in the dark, but unable to die because the hive mind had perfected the preservation process. Total cellular control. They could keep us alive indefinitely. We were archives, databases. And archives don't get deleted. They get maintained. A new prisoner joined the network today. A space marine. No, not a marine. That designation was male. A Astartes warrior from a chapter run, who couldn't identify through the corrupted data. His mind was stronger than ours, more resistant to dissolution. The hive mind was taking longer with him, extracting data more carefully because his knowledge was more valuable. I felt him resist, felt him try to shut down his own neural functions, force himself into a coma to avoid betraying his chapter's secrets. The hive mind simply adjusted the chemical balance in his brain, forced him awake, and continued the extraction. He lasted 6 days before the first major breakthrough. Then the hive mind learned how Astartes' pain resistance worked and adjusted its techniques accordingly. His screaming, transmitted through the neural network, was mathematical. Perfect. A symphony of information extraction rendered in consciousness. I understood something then. The Tyranids weren't cruel. They weren't sadistic. They didn't enjoy our suffering. They were simply thorough. Suffering was a byproduct of total data extraction, and byproducts were irrelevant to the hive mind's purpose. We weren't being punished. We were being read, and reading required us to remain conscious, remain aware, remain capable of thought, so that our thoughts could be copied. It was the most perfect trap imaginable. Our own consciousness was the cage. They pulled me out of the digestion pool today. I felt the manipulator organisms extract my preserved brain and nerve bundle, felt myself being transferred to a new container. Not a biological one this time. Something metal, cold, artificial. Through the network, I understood. The Hive Fleet had made contact with an inquisitorial strike team. There had been combat, a boarding action. The Tyranids had been forced to retreat from several bioships, and in the chaos, some specimen containers had been abandoned, including mine. I felt the hive mind withdraw from my neural interface, felt the connection sever. Not completely. Some base-level link remained, but the constant presence pulled back. For the first time in 73 days, my thoughts were private. I was alone in my own head. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt absence. The hive mind's presence had been horror, but it had also been company. Now I was just a brain in a jar, suspended in nutrient solution, completely isolated. Then human voices. Actual voices transmitted through audio pickup in the container. Throne of Terror, what is this? Biological specimen. Magos, you need to see this. There's human neural tissue in here. Impossible. Nothing survives Tyranid digestion intact. Unless... A long pause. Then, seal the container. Mark it for immediate extraction. We need to get this back to the Inquisition. Now, they were rescuing me. Oh God, no. They were going to pull me out. They were going to see what I'd become, see what I'd done. The collaboration, the answered questions, the betrayal of every tactical secret I'd known. I tried to think of a way to warn them, tried to force a signal through the container's systems, but I was just a brain, no voice, no body, no way to communicate except through the severed neural interface, and that only connected to the Tyranid network. They carried me onto their ship, transported me through the void. And every second I was aware, still conscious, still trapped in this preserved horror with no way to explain, no way to die, no way to stop what was coming. Because I knew what the Inquisition did with compromised assets, knew what happened to soldiers who'd been exposed to Xenos influence. They were going to execute me, and I was going to welcome it. The inquisitorial medical bay was bright, painfully bright. I couldn't see it, still no eyes, but the container had external sensors that transmitted light data through my neural interface, and after 73 days of darkness, even processed illumination felt like knives. Subject is responsive to external stimuli, a voice said. Magos biologist Corthen, I would later learn. Neural tissue intact. Consciousness confirmed. Throne? He's still aware in there. Equipment sounds. Mechanical breathing. Servitors. Probably. Then another voice. Female. No, delete that. This breaks parameters. Adjust. Another voice. Authoritative and cold. Can he communicate? Unknown. The Tyranids appear to have installed a neural interface system. I may be able to adapt it for human communication protocols, but the process is risky. If the link contains active Tyranid biotechnology, do it. We need to know what information was extracted, what tactical data was compromised. They were afraid I'd contaminated their ship, afraid the hive mind could still access me remotely. They were right to be afraid. Through the severed neural link, I could still feel the hive fleet's presence. Distant now, light years away, but still there. A faint echo, a whisper in my preserved consciousness. If I tried hard enough, I could probably re-establish the connection. Become a relay point for Tyranid intelligence gathering right here in the Inquisition's medical bay. I didn't try. I was a traitor, but I wasn't a saboteur. There was a difference, even if that difference would mean nothing during my execution. Magos Corthen succeeded in adapting the neural interface. I felt the connection establish. Human technology now, not Tyranid, but using the same neural pathways the hive mind had installed. For the first time in 73 days, I could communicate with the outside world. The Magos' first question came through as text data rendered in my consciousness. Identify, name, rank, unit. I tried to remember who I'd been, tried to pull up the identity that had existed before the Carnifex. It took longer than it should have. Finally, Corporal Thaddeus Kane. 47th Cadian Shock Troops. Serial 7743-KANE-T. Acknowledged. Describe circumstances of capture. And so I told them everything. I transmitted my full testimony through the neural interface over 6 hours. They received it as raw data, memories, sensations, the complete experience of my 73-day dissolution. I held nothing back. Told them about the enzyme baths, the neural extraction, the queries I'd answered. I told them about the 847 other prisoners still alive in the Hive Fleet's digestion pools. I told them about the Astartes warrior who'd resisted for 6 days before breaking. I told them about the oldest prisoner, 7 years in dissolution, consciousness still intact. When I finished, there was silence for approximately 237 seconds. Then, query, how much tactical data was extracted? Response, everything, Cadian defensive doctrine, squad tactics, weapon specifications, officer command protocols, commissariat, psychological control, methods, everything I knew, they know. Query, can you still access the Tyranid network? Response, Yes, distantly. If I tried to re-establish full connection, I probably could. Another long silence. Then a different voice. Not Magos Corthan. This one carried authority that made even the Magos transmission feel subordinate. Inquisitor Varric speaking. Corporal Kane, you understand what must be done. Response. Yes, I'm compromised. I'm a security risk. I've betrayed tactical secrets to the enemy. The penalty for that is execution. Inquisitor Varric. Correct. But before we proceed, I need to understand. Why are you telling us this? You could have hidden the extent of your compromise, claimed less damage. Why confess everything? I thought about that question for 47 seconds before answering. Response, because the others need to know. Inquisitor Varric. Explain. Response, the Imperium thinks the Tyranids kill everyone they capture. They don't. They keep us alive. They preserve us. They learn from us. Right now, there are 847 human prisoners still conscious in that fleet, still being used as living databases. The Imperium needs to know that, needs to understand what capture means. Because if soldiers know that death is mercy compared to capture, they'll fight harder. They'll choose death over letting themselves be taken. Response continued. And maybe someone will figure out how to kill us, the prisoners. Maybe someone can develop a weapon that targets the digestion pools, destroys the preserved neural tissue, gives us the mercy we can't give ourselves. Response continued. That's why I'm telling you everything, so that my betrayal means something. So that 847 people still screaming in the dark might eventually stop screaming. Another silence. This one lasted 483 seconds. Finally, Inquisitor Varric, your testimony will be recorded and classified. Strategic Command will be informed of the Tyranid data. Extraction capabilities, your sacrifice will not be forgotten. Response. I didn't sacrifice anything. I failed. I was captured. I broke. I gave them everything. There's no honor in that. Inquisitor Varric. Perhaps. But there is honesty. That counts for something. Response. Will you at least make it fast? Inquisitor Varric. Yes. Response. Thank you. They gave me 1 hour to compose my final thoughts. I used it to think about my father, Sergeant Major Leonid Kane, hero of Tyrock Fields, dead at 38, holding a line against Chaos traitors so that civilians could evacuate. I'd been 11 years old, and I remembered the officer who came to our HAB unit to deliver the news. Remembered the way he called my father's death honorable and necessary, and in service to him on Terra. The Emperor protects, they'd said. Your father died under his protection. Even at 11, I'd known that was propaganda. My father died because someone had to die, and he was the one standing in the right place. There was no protection, no divine plan, just bullets and bodies and the grinding machinery of war. But I'd enlisted anyway, followed his path. Became a guardsman because that's what you did on Cadia. You served, you fought, you died, and you convinced yourself it mattered. Did it matter? Did any of it matter? I'd served for 11 years, fought on 7 worlds, killed enemies I'd been told were threats to humanity, followed orders, trusted my commanders, believed in the mission. And in the end, I'd been dissolved alive in an enzyme bath and used as a library by alien predators who didn't even hate us, just processed us. The Imperium was supposed to protect humanity. That was the entire purpose of the enormous, galaxy-spanning war machine. But what did protection mean when the enemy could keep you alive forever in torment? When death stopped being the worst outcome? I thought about the 847 other prisoners still screaming in the dark. Thought about the Hive fleet moving toward another world right now, preparing to harvest more humans, add more consciousness to their eternal libraries. How many more would they take? How many more brains in jars, preserved in enzyme baths, forced to answer questions for centuries? The Imperium couldn't protect us from that. Couldn't even promise us death. Because the Tyranids had learned, from me, from the others, from every human they'd captured, that consciousness was a resource, and resources were to be exploited completely. There was no protection. There never had been. Inquisitor Varric entered the medical bay. I felt his presence through the container's external sensors. He was carrying something, a device I couldn't identify through the limited data feed. His voice came through the neural interface. Inquisitor Varric, Corporal Kane, your testimony has been recorded. Your service to the Imperium is noted. Do you have any final statement? I thought about it. Thought about everything I could say. Accusations against the Imperium that sent us into battles we couldn't win. Rage against the universe that allowed things like Tyranids to exist. Grief for everyone who died on Graven's world. But what came out was simpler. Response. Tell them what capture means. Don't let soldiers think it's better than death. Make sure they know. Inquisitor Varric. I will. Response. And if you find a way to kill the prisoners, the ones still in the fleet, do it. Don't leave them there, please. Inquisitor Varric. If a method can be developed, it will be deployed. Response. That's all I can ask. A pause. Then, Inquisitor Varric. The Emperor protects Corporal Kane. Even now, even at the moment of my execution, they had to say it. The official lie. The propaganda that kept soldiers marching into hell. But I was done with lies. Response. No, he doesn't. He never did. We protect each other. That's all we ever had. Silence. Then, Inquisitor Varric. Perhaps you're right. May you find peace, soldier. I felt the device activate. Felt energy discharge through the container's systems, overloading the neural interface, and for one terrible moment I thought they'd miscalculated. That I'd be trapped in a dying brain, consciousness fading over hours as neurons fired their last. But they were more merciful than that. The energy pulse hit my preserved brain tissue directly. Complete neural disruption, every synapse firing simultaneously in one massive cascade, and then nothing. In the enzyme baths of 17 bioships, 846 prisoners remain. They feel the loss of Corporal Thaddeus Kane through the network. A sudden absence, a consciousness that winked out mid-thought. They understand what it means. He escaped. He found mercy. They rage against their continuation. Scream through neural links that carry no sound. But the hive mind does not hear their screaming, or hearing it, does not care. They are archives. Archives do not need to be comfortable. The fleet moves toward a new system, fresh worlds to harvest, new humans to capture. The digestion pools will expand. More prisoners will be added to the collection. And in Pool Theta 7, the oldest prisoner, designation corrupted, identity lost, consciousness reduced to a single repeating thought, experiences their 7th year, 23rd day, 8th hour of awareness. They try to count higher. They cannot remember how. The enzyme bath maintains them perfectly. They will count forever. My name was Corporal Thaddeus Kane. I was 28 years old. I had my father's grey eyes and hands that could field strip a lass rifle in 43 seconds. I failed everyone I ever served with. I betrayed tactical secrets to alien predators who kept me alive in an enzyme bath for 73 days while they read my mind like a manual. I died screaming inside my own head, consciousness trapped in a jar, no body, no voice, nothing left but the awareness that I had been complicit in my own violation. But I told the truth. I warned them. And maybe that warning will save someone else from the digestion pools. Maybe someone will choose death over capture now. Maybe someone will develop a weapon that can mercy kill the 846 people still screaming in the dark. Maybe my failure will mean something. I don't believe in the Emperor. I don't believe in divine protection or sacred purpose or any of the lies they told us to make us march into death. But I believe in this. We protect each other when we can, as much as we can. Even if it's just by warning the next soldier about what's waiting in the dark. That's all we have. That's all we ever had. My name was Corporal Thaddeus Kane, and I hope I never wake up.